The grand ballroom of Kensington Palace buzzed with quiet conversation as some of Britain's most celebrated entertainers mingled with members of the royal family. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegant gathering, where comedy legends, acclaimed actors, and cultural icons had come together for a special reception honoring British entertainment's contribution to global culture. Prince William moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his genuine smile and warm handshake making each guest feel welcomed and valued. At 39, the future king had mastered the art of royal mingling, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he was meeting people who had shaped his childhood in ways they could never imagine. Standing near the ornate fireplace, John Cleese surveyed the room with the same sharp wit that had made him a comedy legend. At 82, the Monty Python star remained as tall and imposing as ever, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his eyes twinkling with mischief. He wore a classic black dinner jacket that emphasized his distinguished bearing, though anyone who knew him well could see he was suppressing the urge to do something completely unexpected. "Mr. Cleese," Prince William approached with genuine enthusiasm, extending his hand. "What an absolute pleasure to finally meet you in person." John's face lit up with surprise and delight. "Your Royal Highness, the pleasure is entirely mine, though I must admit, I'm rather curious what brings you over to speak with an old python." William laughed, a sound that carried across the nearby conversations and caused several heads to turn. "Actually, I have something rather special to tell you. It's about your work, particularly Fawlty Towers." The mention of his iconic sitcom caused John to raise an eyebrow with interest. Fawlty Towers, the show he had created and starred in during the 1970s, remained beloved decades later. The story of Basil Fawlty, the manic hotel owner with a talent for turning minor problems into complete disasters, had become a cornerstone of British comedy. "Ah, Basil Fawlty," John said with a theatrical sigh. "That neurotic hotelier who made my life both wonderful and absolutely mad for 2 glorious seasons. What about the old boy?" William's smile grew broader. "Well, you see, my children have discovered your show. George, Charlotte, and Louis have been watching it, and they absolutely love it." John's expression shifted from mild interest to genuine astonishment. "You're serious? The future heirs to the throne are watching a middle-aged man have nervous breakdowns over hotel management." "Completely serious," William confirmed, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "In fact, I'd say they're rather obsessed with it. George has started doing impressions of Basil, and Charlotte keeps quoting Manuel. 'I know nothing' has become something of a catchphrase around Adelaide Cottage." The image of the young royals mimicking the chaotic antics of Fawlty Towers struck John as wonderfully absurd. He could picture Prince George, all of 9 years old, attempting to recreate Basil's famous walk or his explosive outbursts. The thought of Princess Charlotte, with her spirited personality, channeling Manuel's confused innocence was equally delightful. "This is extraordinary," John said, shaking his head in wonder. "When I was writing those episodes with Connie Booth, sitting in that cramped little office, struggling to make the chaos seem believable, I never imagined." He paused, seemingly overwhelmed by the revelation. "You never imagined what?" William prompted gently. "That future monarchs would be learning about the fine art of hotel mismanagement from Basil Fawlty," John finished with a laugh. "It's rather like discovering Shakespeare learned swordplay from watching cartoons." William chuckled at the comparison. "I suppose it is rather unexpected, but honestly watching them watch your show has been one of the great joys of recent months. They don't just laugh at the physical comedy, though George nearly fell off the sofa during the fire drill episode. They actually understand the characters." "Do they indeed?" John leaned forward with interest. "What do they make of poor Sybil?" "Charlotte has very strong opinions about Sybil," William replied with evident pride. "She thinks Basil should listen to his wife more often, and that most of his problems would disappear if he just paid attention to what she was trying to tell him." "Wise girl," John nodded approvingly. "She's grasped something that took me years to understand about marriage. Connie and I wrote Sybil as the voice of reason precisely because we knew someone needed to be the adult in that relationship." The conversation had drawn the attention of other guests nearby, who found themselves inadvertently eavesdropping on this unexpected exchange between royalty and comedy royalty. The idea that the Cambridge children were Fawlty Towers fans was creating ripples of delight throughout the gathering. "And what about young Louis?" John inquired. Surely he's a bit young for hotel-based situational comedy. William's expression grew even more animated. You'd think so, but Louis has an incredible talent for mimicking the physical comedy. He's only 5, but he's mastered what I can only describe as a miniature version of Basil's frustrated gestures. Yesterday, Catherine found him in the kitchen, apparently recreating the scene where Basil tries to fix the car by beating it with a tree branch. He was beating something with a stick, John asked with mock alarm. A wooden spoon against a toy car, William clarified quickly. Though with the same level of theatrical fury, it was simultaneously hilarious and slightly concerning. John threw back his head and laughed, a rich sound that drew smiles from everyone within earshot. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The boy clearly understands that sometimes the only logical response to inanimate objects is violence. Very royal, very practical. Catherine suggested we might want to monitor his viewing more carefully, William admitted. She's concerned about him picking up Basil's management style. Probably wise, John agreed sagely. Though I must say, Basil's approach to customer service could revolutionize the hospitality industry. Think of the efficiency gains from simply telling difficult guests exactly what you think of them. William nodded thoughtfully. George asked me if that's how hotels actually work. I had to explain that most hoteliers don't hide behind potted plants to avoid their guests or pretend to be someone else when answering the phone. More's the pity, John replied. The world would be far more entertaining if they did. As their conversation continued, other guests began gravitating toward them, drawn by the obvious warmth and humor of their exchange. Dame Judi Dench appeared at John's elbow, her eyes bright with curiosity. "John, you look positively gleeful," she observed. "What's brought on this particular bout of happiness?" "Judy, my dear," John said, gesturing grandly, "I've just learned that I'm apparently corrupting the future of the monarchy. Prince William's children are devoted fans of Fawlty Towers." Dame Judy's face lit up with delight. "Oh, how marvelous! Which episodes do they prefer?" William found himself surrounded by some of Britain's most talented performers, all eager to hear about his children's reaction to classic British comedy. The conversation that had started as a simple greeting was blossoming into something far more meaningful. "They love the Germans episode," William explained. "Though we've had to have several conversations about historical context and why certain things were considered funny then but aren't appropriate now." "Ah yes, the concussion episode," John nodded. "Basil's finest moment of international diplomacy. Don't mention the war has become something of a cultural touchstone, hasn't it?" "George keeps trying to use it in inappropriate contexts," William admitted. "Last week, during a history lesson about World War II, he announced to his tutor, 'Whatever you do, don't mention the war.' It caused quite a bit of confusion." "I imagine it did," Dame Judy said with obvious amusement, "though I rather admire his timing." Hugh Bonville joined the growing circle, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand its remarkable nature. "Are we seriously discussing the young princes and princess as Fawlty Towers aficionados?" "Indeed we are," John confirmed. "It seems my legacy lies not in Python or film work, but in providing comedy education to future monarchs." "It's extraordinary," William continued, "watching them discover something that was already a classic before they were born. They don't see it as old or dated. To them, it's just incredibly funny." "That's the mark of truly timeless comedy," Hugh observed. "Physical humor and character-driven madness translate across generations." John nodded thoughtfully. "You know, when we were making those episodes, we were so focused on making each joke land, each bit of business work perfectly, that we rarely thought about longevity. We just wanted to make people laugh." "Mission accomplished," William said warmly. "You've certainly succeeded in our household." The group around them had grown to include several other notable figures from British entertainment, each adding their own perspective on the unexpected revelation. The formal nature of the reception had given way to something much more intimate and genuine. "I must ask," said actress Olivia Colman, who had quietly joined the conversation, "do the children understand that Basil is meant to be the villain of his own story?" William considered this carefully. "That's a fascinating question. I think they see him as someone who creates his own problems, but they also sympathize with him when everything goes wrong. Charlotte, in particular, seems to understand that he means well but executes everything badly." Perceptive girl, John commented. That was exactly what we were trying to achieve. Basil needed to be sympathetic despite being absolutely maddening. Louis, being 5, mostly just enjoys the chaos, William added. He doesn't worry about the deeper meanings. He just thinks it's hilarious when Basil trips over things or gets confused. As it should be, John said with satisfaction. Comedy should work on multiple levels. The physical stuff makes 5-year-olds laugh, while the character dynamics entertain adults. Catherine Tate, who had been listening intently, spoke up. Have they tried watching any Python yet? William shook his head. We decided to start with Fawlty Towers because it's slightly more contained. Python might be a bit much for bedtime viewing. Probably wise, John agreed. Though I'd love to know what they'd make of the dead parrot sketch. Children have a wonderful appreciation for the absurd. The conversation continued to flow naturally, with each participant sharing their own memories of discovering classic British comedy. What had begun as a formal royal reception was transforming into something much more personal and meaningful. You know, William said thoughtfully, one of the things I love about watching them discover your show is seeing how humor connects generations. Here's something you created decades ago, and it's bringing our family together in unexpected ways. That's the real magic of comedy, John replied seriously. It creates shared experiences across time and space. When your children laugh at the same things that made people laugh 40 years ago, they're participating in a kind of cultural conversation that spans generations. The profound simplicity of this observation settled over the group like a warm blanket. In a world that often seemed divided by technology and changing values, the enduring power of laughter remained constant. I hope, William said quietly, that they'll remember these viewing sessions when they're adults. Not just the laughter, but the feeling of discovering something wonderful together. They will, Dame Judy assured him. Those moments become part of who we are. I can still remember watching Morecambe and Wise with my parents and how special those Sunday evenings felt. As the evening progressed, the conversation around Prince William and John Cleese continued to deepen and expand. What had started as a simple sharing of family viewing habits had evolved into a celebration of comedy's enduring power to unite, entertain, and create lasting memories across generations. The following morning at Adelaide Cottage, Prince William found himself smiling as he recalled the previous evening's conversation with John Cleese. The early sunlight streamed through the windows of the family breakfast room, where Catherine was helping 5-year-old Louis with his cereal while Princess Charlotte, now 8, regaled them with detailed plans for her day. Daddy, you look particularly pleased with yourself this morning, Catherine observed, pouring herself a cup of tea. Did something special happen at the reception last night? Before William could respond, 9-year-old Prince George looked up from his toast with keen interest. Was it exciting? Did you meet anyone famous? William sat down at the table, accepting the cup of coffee Catherine offered him. Actually, I met someone very special indeed, someone whose work you 3 know quite well. Charlotte's eyes lit up immediately. Was it someone from a film we've seen? Not exactly a film, William said mysteriously, enjoying their growing curiosity. Someone from a television show you've all become rather fond of recently. Louis, who had been concentrating intensely on capturing elusive pieces of cereal with his spoon, suddenly looked up with excitement. Was it the man who makes the funny faces? Catherine raised an eyebrow questioningly, while George and Charlotte exchanged glances of growing comprehension. The man who makes funny faces, George repeated slowly, his eyes widening. Do you mean, did you meet Basil Fawlty? William laughed at his son's astonishment. I met the actor who plays Basil Fawlty, John Cleese, and when I told him that you 3 love watching Fawlty Towers, he was absolutely delighted. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Charlotte dropped her spoon with a clatter, George's mouth fell open, and Louis let out a squeal of excitement that probably carried to the palace guards. You told him about us? Charlotte asked in amazement. What did he say? Was he pleased? Did he do any of the voices? Did he walk like Basil? George added eagerly, already beginning to demonstrate the peculiar gait that John Cleese had made famous. Catherine watched this exchange with growing amusement. I take it this John Cleese was impressed by our children's television viewing choices. More than impressed, William confirmed. He seemed genuinely moved that you 3 had discovered his show and loved it so much. He was particularly interested in your impressions, George. George immediately straightened up, his face taking on an expression of exaggerated dignity mixed with barely controlled panic. You mean like this? What? What are you talking about, you silly woman? His impression was surprisingly accurate for a 9-year-old, capturing not just the words but the physical comedy that made Basil Fawlty so memorable. Catherine covered her mouth to suppress her laughter while Louis giggled uncontrollably. That's exactly what I told him you could do, William said proudly. And Charlotte, he was very interested to hear about your observations on Sybil. Charlotte blushed slightly but seemed pleased. Did you tell him that I think Basil would be much happier if he just listened to his wife more? I did indeed. And John said you were a very wise girl for understanding something that took him years to learn about marriage. Catherine shot William a meaningful look that clearly said, I hope you're paying attention to our daughter's wisdom as well. And what about me? Louis asked, not wanting to be left out of this remarkable connection to their television hero. I told him about your excellent recreation of the car-beating scene, William replied. He was particularly impressed by your commitment to the physical comedy. Louis beamed with pride and immediately began demonstrating his interpretation of Basil's frustrated car maintenance technique, using an invisible branch to attack an equally invisible vehicle. Careful, darling, Catherine warned gently. We don't want you accidentally hitting something real. Did Mr. Cleese say anything else? George asked, clearly hopping for more details about this magical encounter. William considered how much to share. The conversation had been so much richer and more meaningful than he could easily explain to children. He said that comedy like Fawlty Towers is special because it brings families together. He seemed very happy that you were all watching it and laughing together. Could we meet him? Charlotte asked suddenly, her voice filled with hope. Do you think he would like to meet us? The innocent question caught William off guard. The idea of arranging such a meeting hadn't occurred to him, but seeing the eager faces of his children, he found himself considering the possibilities. That's actually a very interesting idea, he said slowly. I'm not sure how these things work, but perhaps we could explore the possibility. Catherine looked at her husband with a mixture of amusement and mild concern. William, are you seriously considering arranging a meeting between our children and John Cleese? Why not? William replied, warming to the idea. He seemed genuinely delighted by their appreciation of his work, and think about what an incredible experience it would be for them. George had clearly inherited his father's enthusiasm for the idea. We could show him our impressions and ask him how they made all the funny scenes work. I could ask him about Sybil, Charlotte added excitedly, and whether they planned for her to be so sensible or if it just happened that way. Louis, not fully understanding the implications but caught up in the excitement, began bouncing in his chair. Can we ask him to do the walking? The funny walking. Catherine watched her family's growing enthusiasm with maternal fondness mixed with practical concern. Let's think about this carefully. Mr. Cleese is a very famous person with a busy schedule. We can't just invite him over for tea. Actually, William said thoughtfully, from what I gathered last night, he's not as busy as you might think, and he seemed genuinely interested in meeting the children. He kept asking questions about their reactions to different episodes. Really? Catherine's expression softened. He was that interested in what they thought. He was fascinated. I think, for someone who creates comedy, knowing that it's still making children laugh decades later must be incredibly meaningful. George had been thinking seriously about the practical aspects of such a meeting. Where would we meet him? Could he come here, or would we go to his house? I don't think Mr. Cleese lives in a hotel, Charlotte said with the matter-of-fact tone that often made her parents smile. No, sweetheart, Catherine confirmed. Actors don't actually live in the places they pretend to be in television shows. Louis looked disappointed. So there's no real Fawlty Towers hotel? I'm afraid not, William explained gently. Though the hotel they used for filming is real, it's in Torquay and you can actually stay there if you want. This revelation sparked a whole new avenue of excitement. Could we go there? George asked immediately. Could we stay in the real hotel? Could we see where they filmed the car scene? Charlotte added. And the kitchen where Manuel worked? Louis contributed, though he pronounced it Manuel in his 5-year-old attempt at the Spanish accent. Catherine looked at William with an expression that clearly conveyed the message. Look what you've started. Let's not plan an entire Fawlty Towers pilgrimage just yet, she said diplomatically. First, let's see if Mr. Cleese might be interested in meeting you three. How would we arrange such a thing? William wondered aloud. I don't exactly have John Cleese's phone number. I imagine his representatives could be contacted through proper channels, Catherine suggested practically, though I'm still not entirely sure this is a good idea. Why not? Charlotte asked with genuine curiosity. Catherine paused, trying to formulate an answer that would make sense to an 8-year-old. Well, sometimes when you meet the people who create things you love, it can change how you feel about those things. What if he's very different from what you expect? George considered this seriously. But he can't be that different. He made something that makes us laugh every time we watch it. Someone who can do that must be quite nice. The simple logic of his reasoning was hard to argue with. Besides, Charlotte added, Daddy said he seemed nice when they talked last night. He did seem very nice, William confirmed. Funny, intelligent, and genuinely interested in your reactions to his work. Louis had been following the conversation with the intense concentration he usually reserved for particularly challenging puzzles. If we meet the Basil man, will he teach us how to do the silly walk? That's actually from a different show, darling, Catherine explained. The Ministry of Silly Walks is from Monty Python, which is something else Mr. Cleese did. This information only added to Louis's excitement. He did more funny things. Can we watch those too? William and Catherine exchanged glances. Introducing their 5-year-old to Monty Python might be opening a door they weren't quite ready to walk through. Let's master Fawlty Towers first, William suggested diplomatically. As breakfast continued, the conversation kept returning to the possibility of meeting John Cleese. The children's enthusiasm was infectious, and William found himself increasingly convinced that such a meeting could be arranged. I'll make some inquiries, he finally announced. I can't promise anything, but I'll see what might be possible. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 young voices erupted in celebration, causing the family's dogs to come running to investigate the source of such excitement. But, Catherine added firmly, establishing some ground rules, this can only happen if Mr. Cleese genuinely wants to meet you. We won't impose on his time or make him feel obligated. Of course not, George agreed solemnly. We would only want to meet him if he actually wants to meet us too. And we'd have to be on our very best behavior, Charlotte added, showing the thoughtfulness that never failed to impress her parents. What's best behavior for meeting a comedy person? Louis asked with genuine confusion. Probably the same as meeting anyone else, William suggested. Being polite, listening carefully, and maybe not recreating all the physical comedy until he suggests it. Louis looked slightly disappointed by this restriction, but nodded his understanding. As the family finished breakfast, the excitement of the possibility continued to permeate the morning routine. Even Catherine, despite her initial reservations, found herself caught up in imagining how such a meeting might unfold. If this does happen, she said to William as they cleared the table, it would certainly be a story they'd remember for the rest of their lives. That's exactly what I was thinking, William replied. How many children get to meet the person who created something they love so much? The morning sunshine seemed particularly bright as the Cambridge family began their day, each of them carrying the exciting possibility that had emerged from a simple conversation at a royal reception the night before. 3 weeks later, John Cleese sat in his comfortable study in his London home, reading the most unusual invitation he had received in decades. The formal letterhead of Kensington Palace gave weight to what might otherwise have seemed like an elaborate joke. The private secretary's carefully worded request was both respectful and surprisingly personal, explaining that His Royal Highness Prince William wondered if Mr. Cleese might be interested in meeting the young Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, who had become devoted fans of Fawlty Towers. John set down the letter and leaned back in his leather chair, a bemused smile playing across his features. In his long career, he had received countless invitations to meet dignitaries, celebrities, and heads of state, but an invitation to meet 3 children who loved his comedy work felt uniquely special. The letter went on to explain that this would be an entirely informal gathering, perhaps afternoon tea at Adelaide Cottage, with no media presence and no official obligations. The children, it noted, were particularly eager to ask questions about how the show was made and to share their own impressions of various characters and episodes. John reached for his phone to call his daughter Camilla, who often served as his sounding board for unusual opportunities. "Dad," Camilla answered after the second ring, "please tell me you haven't accidentally agreed to appear in another reality television program." "Nothing so dramatic," John chuckled, "though I have received what might be the most charming invitation of my entire career." He read her the letter, hearing her growing amazement through her increasingly frequent interruptions of "really? And you're joking." "So let me understand this correctly," Camilla said when he had finished. "The future King of England's children watch Fawlty Towers, love it enough to do impressions, and now want to meet you to discuss it." "That appears to be the situation, yes." "Dad, this is extraordinary. You have to say yes." "I'm leaning heavily in that direction," John admitted. "Though I must confess, I'm slightly nervous about meeting 3 children who know my work better than some critics do." "Why nervous?" John considered the question seriously. Children are brutally honest. If they think something isn't funny, they won't pretend otherwise for the sake of politeness. What if they ask me questions I can't answer? What if they've noticed inconsistencies in the show that I never caught? "Dad," Camilla said with gentle amusement, "you're worried that 3 children might outsmart you about a show you created. When you put it like that, it does sound rather silly. Besides, from what Prince William told you, they clearly love the show. They're not looking to critique it, they want to celebrate it." John nodded, though she couldn't see him. "You're right, of course. And honestly, the idea of discussing Fawlty Towers with genuinely enthusiastic fans, regardless of their age, is rather appealing." "When would this meeting happen?" "According to the letter, whenever is convenient for me. They're being remarkably accommodating." "Then call them back and say yes. This is the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime." After ending the call with Camilla, John sat quietly for several minutes, imagining the encounter. He pictured 3 well-behaved royal children sitting politely while he explained the finer points of physical comedy. Then he caught himself and laughed. If Prince William's descriptions were accurate, these weren't children who would sit politely through anything. They were young people who actively engaged with comedy, who recreated scenes and developed their own interpretations of characters. John picked up the phone and dialed the number provided in the letter. 2 hours later, the arrangements were complete. The following Thursday afternoon, John Cleese would join the Cambridge family for tea at Adelaide Cottage. The conversation with Prince William's private secretary had been refreshingly straightforward, with none of the usual protocols and formalities that typically surrounded royal engagements. "The family is very much looking forward to meeting you," the private secretary had assured him. "Though I should warn you that the children have been preparing questions since their father first mentioned your conversation." "Preparing questions?" John had asked with interest. "Prince George has compiled what can only be described as a comprehensive list of inquiries about the show's production. Princess Charlotte has been researching the character relationships, and Prince Louis has been practicing his Manuel impression." John had laughed delightedly. "This sounds like the most thorough audience preparation I've ever encountered." On Thursday morning, John found himself unusually anxious as he prepared for the afternoon meeting. He had performed for audiences of thousands, been interviewed by the world's toughest journalists, and debated with some of the sharpest minds in entertainment. Yet the prospect of facing 3 children who genuinely loved his work felt uniquely challenging. He selected his clothes carefully, choosing a comfortable sweater and casual trousers rather than anything formal. If he was going to discuss comedy with children, he wanted to look approachable rather than intimidating. The drive to Adelaide Cottage took him through the familiar streets of London and then into the more pastoral setting of Windsor. As his car approached the cottage, John was struck by how normal and family-oriented the setting appeared. This wasn't a palace or a grand estate. It was simply a lovely home where a family happened to live. Prince William met him at the door, his greeting warm and relaxed. "Mr. Cleese, thank you so much for agreeing to this. The children have been counting down the days." "The pleasure is entirely mine," John replied sincerely, "though I must admit I'm rather nervous about living up to their expectations." "Don't be. They're just excited to meet someone whose work has brought them so much joy." As they walked through the cottage's comfortable rooms, John could hear voices from what was clearly the sitting room ahead. The animated conversation suddenly stopped as footsteps approached, and he could almost feel the anticipation building. "Children," William called out as they entered the sitting room, "I'd like you to meet Mr. John Cleese." The three young people who stood to greet him were exactly as William had described, yet somehow more vivid in person. Prince George stood tall for his age, his handshake firm and his eyes bright with intelligence. Princess Charlotte's smile was warm and immediate, her curtsy perfectly executed, but somehow managing to convey genuine enthusiasm rather than mere protocol. Prince Louis bounded forward with the unreserved excitement that only 5-year-olds could manage. "Mr. Cleese," Charlotte exclaimed, her formal greeting giving way to obvious delight. "We're so pleased to meet you. We have so many things we want to ask you." "And I have so many things I want to ask you," John replied, settling into the chair Catherine indicated. "Your father tells me you've become quite expert on Fawlty Towers." "We watch it all the time," George confirmed seriously. "We've seen every episode at least 3 times. Some of them more than that," Louis added helpfully. John looked around at the family gathered in their comfortable sitting room, struck by the surreal normalcy of the situation. Here was the future King of England, his wife, and their children, gathered around their television just like any other British family, bonding over a comedy that was older than the parents themselves. "So," he said, settling back into his chair with growing confidence, "what would you like to know about the world of Basil Fawlty?" The flood of questions that followed was immediate and comprehensive. George wanted to know about the technical aspects of filming the physical comedy. How did they make sure John didn't actually hurt himself when Basil fell down or ran into things? How many takes did the more complicated scenes require? "The secret," John explained, "is that most of it really did hurt. I have the bruises and scars to prove that Basil Fawlty was very hard on my body." Charlotte's questions were more character-focused. She wanted to understand the relationships between the different people in the hotel. "Why doesn't Sybil just leave Basil if he makes her so unhappy?" she asked with 8-year-old directness. John paused, considering how to explain the complexities of a dysfunctional marriage to a child. "I think," he said carefully, "that Sybil sees something good in Basil that he doesn't always see in himself, and sometimes people stay together because they hope the person they love will become the person they know they could be." "Like she's trying to help him be better?" Charlotte asked. "Exactly like that." Louis's contributions to the conversation were more physical than verbal. When John mentioned Manuel's confusion and innocence, Louis immediately launched into his impression of the character, complete with the accent and bewildered expressions that made Manuel so endearing. "Que?" Louis asked with perfect timing, his small face a mask of theatrical confusion. John was delighted. "Brilliant. You've captured exactly the right mixture of confusion and eagerness to please." Catherine served tea and small cakes, while the conversation flowed naturally between comedy techniques, character motivations, and the children's own interpretations of various scenes. John found himself genuinely impressed by their insights and questions. "You know," he told them as the afternoon progressed, "talking with you three has helped me understand things about the show that I never quite realized when we were making it." "Really?" George asked with obvious pleasure. "Really? When you're creating something, you're so focused on making each individual scene work that you sometimes miss the bigger picture. Hearing how you see the characters and their relationships gives me a whole new perspective on what we actually created." As the afternoon light began to fade, John realized that this had become one of the most enjoyable and meaningful conversations about his work that he had ever experienced. These 3 young people had approached Fawlty Towers with fresh eyes and open hearts, finding humor and meaning that even he hadn't fully appreciated. "Before I go," he said, "would you like me to show you how we did some of the physical comedy? I mean, the safe versions that won't actually hurt anyone." The suggestion to demonstrate some of the physical comedy techniques transformed the already delightful afternoon into something truly magical. The sitting room at Adelaide Cottage suddenly became an impromptu comedy workshop as John Cleese, at 82 years old, prepared to show 3 young royal children the secrets behind Basil Fawlty's legendary physical mishaps. "Now then," John said, rising from his chair with theatrical gravity, "the most important thing about physical comedy is that it must look completely real while being absolutely safe. The audience needs to believe that something terrible is happening to someone who absolutely deserves it." Catherine moved some of the more delicate ornaments out of harm's way, while William cleared a larger space in the center of the room. The children gathered around with the intense focus they usually reserved for their most interesting lessons. "Let's start with something simple," John continued, surveying the available space. "The art of the dramatic trip. Basil trips over things constantly, but it can't look deliberate, and I can't actually fall down hard enough to hurt myself." He positioned himself near the coffee table, adopting Basil's characteristic posture of barely controlled dignity mixed with underlying panic. "The secret is in the timing and the expression," he explained, beginning to walk with Basil's peculiar gait. "You have to show the audience that the character is completely unaware of the impending disaster while simultaneously preparing your own body for what's about to happen." With perfect timing, John's foot appeared to catch on the coffee table leg. His arms windmilled dramatically. His eyes went wide with the kind of panic that only Basil could achieve, and he executed a controlled stumble that looked absolutely genuine while keeping him perfectly safe. The children erupted in delighted laughter and spontaneous applause. "How did you do that?" George demanded. "It looked like you really tripped." "Practice," John replied with satisfaction. 30 years of practice, and excellent reflexes, though they're not quite what they used to be." "Can you teach us?" Charlotte asked eagerly. "I can teach you the safe version," John confirmed. "But you must promise to never try anything dangerous. The goal is to make people laugh, not to end up in hospital." What followed was perhaps the most unusual masterclass in physical comedy ever conducted in a royal residence. John guided each child through the basics of safe stage falls, exaggerated reactions, and the fine art of looking dignified while ridiculous things happened around you. George proved particularly adept at the dramatic pause that preceded most of Basil's mishaps. "The audience needs to see it coming just a moment before the character does," John explained, watching George's attempt. "Perfect. You've got the timing exactly right." Charlotte mastered the art of Sybil's long-suffering expressions, practicing the eye rolls and sighs that conveyed decades of marital frustration in a single look. "Sybil has to be the most patient woman in television history," she observed. "She absolutely does," John agreed. "And she has to show that patience while also showing that her patience is running out." Louis, at 5, was naturally gifted at Manuel's bewildered innocence. His small size actually enhanced the effect, making him look even more vulnerable and confused than the original character. "I know nothing," he declared with perfect Manuel timing, complete with the shoulder shrug and helpless expression. "Magnificent," John exclaimed. "You've captured something that took me months to perfect." William and Catherine watched this extraordinary scene unfold with a mixture of amusement and amazement. Their sitting room had been transformed into a comedy academy, with one of Britain's greatest comedy legends teaching their children the fundamentals of his craft. "I think," Catherine murmured to William, "this is definitely going to be one of their most treasured memories." "Mine too," William replied quietly. "I can't believe this is actually happening." As the lesson continued, John found himself sharing stories about the creation of specific scenes and the challenges of making television comedy in the 1970s. "We didn't have the technology you have now," he explained, settling back into his chair as the children gathered around him like eager students. "If something went wrong during filming, we couldn't just fix it later with computers. Everything had to work the first time." "Did things go wrong often?" George asked. "Constantly," John laughed. "The dining room fire scene took 17 takes because something kept going wrong. Either my timing was off, or a prop wouldn't work, or someone would start giggling." "Who giggled?" Charlotte wanted to know. "Usually me," John admitted. "Sometimes the situations were so ridiculous that even I couldn't keep a straight face." Louis had been thinking seriously about something. "Mr. Cleese," he said with 5-year-old solemnity, "do you miss being Basil?" The question caught John off guard with its unexpected depth. He considered it carefully before answering. "That's a wonderful question, Louis. I miss the fun of creating Basil and working with all the talented people who made the show possible. But I don't miss how stressful it was to be inside Basil's head all the time." "Was it really stressful?" Charlotte asked with concern. "Well, Basil is always worried about everything going wrong, and when you're playing him, you have to feel all that worry and panic. It was exhausting to be that anxious all the time, even if it was just pretending. "But you made it look so easy," George observed. "That's the job," John said simply, "to make difficult things look easy and natural." The afternoon had stretched into early evening, and John realized with surprise that several hours had passed without him being aware of the time. Conversations with children, he reflected, had a way of making time behave differently. "I'm afraid I should probably be going," he said reluctantly, "though I've enjoyed this more than almost any interview or appearance I've done in years." "Do you have to go?" Louis asked with the direct disappointment that only children could express. "I'm afraid so, but I hope we'll see each other again." "Could we," Charlotte asked hopefully, "could we watch an episode together sometime? We could show you all our favorite parts." The suggestion delighted John. "You know, I've never actually watched Fawlty Towers with an audience of genuine fans. That sounds like a wonderful idea." William stepped forward. "Mr. Cleese, this has been absolutely extraordinary. The children will remember this afternoon for the rest of their lives." "As will I," John replied sincerely. "Your children are remarkable. They understand comedy in ways that many adults never do." As they walked toward the door, George suddenly stopped. "Mr. Cleese, could I ask you one more thing?" "Of course." "When you were creating Basil, did you know that children would still be watching him decades later?" John paused, struck again by the thoughtfulness of the question. "No, George, I had no idea. When we were making those episodes, we were just trying to make something funny for people to watch on Sunday nights. I never imagined that children who weren't even born yet would discover it and love it." "Well, we do love it," Charlotte said matter-of-factly. "And now we love it even more because we know how much work you put into making it perfect. And because you taught us how to do the funny walking without falling down," Louis added practically. At the door, John turned back to face the family who had given him such an unexpected and delightful afternoon. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "You've reminded me why I fell in love with comedy in the first place. It's not about being clever or winning awards. It's about creating moments of joy that bring people together." "Thank you for creating Basil," George replied with 9-year-old sincerity, "and for coming to meet us." "And for teaching us the secret walking," Charlotte added with a grin. "And for being nice," Louis concluded with the devastating simplicity that 5-year-olds wielded like a superpower. As John's car pulled away from Adelaide Cottage, he found himself smiling in a way he hadn't experienced in years. The afternoon had reminded him not just of why he had created Basil Fawlty, but of the magical connection between performer and audience that made all the hard work worthwhile. In the cottage behind him, 3 children were already planning their next viewing of Fawlty Towers, armed with new insights into the craft and love that had gone into creating their beloved show. The afternoon had transformed them from viewers into students of comedy, and their appreciation had transformed a successful comedian into something more, a teacher who had passed on not just techniques, but the joy and wonder that made laughter possible. The bond formed that afternoon would continue to grow, built on shared appreciation for the timeless power of comedy to unite generations and create lasting memories that enriched lives in ways both expected and surprisingly profound. 6 months after that magical afternoon at Adelaide Cottage, the relationship between John Cleese and the Cambridge family had evolved into something none of them had anticipated. What had begun as a single meeting had blossomed into a genuine friendship that enriched all their lives in unexpected ways. The follow-up viewing session that Charlotte had suggested had indeed taken place, with John joining the family for what became an extraordinary evening of watching Fawlty Towers episodes, while the creator provided behind-the-scenes commentary. The children's questions had been so insightful, and their observations so sharp, that John found himself seeing his own work through completely new eyes. "You know," he had told William that evening, "I think your children understand Basil better than most television critics do." The connection had grown naturally from there. John discovered that he genuinely enjoyed the company of these 3 young people, who approached everything with curiosity and intelligence. The children, for their part, had found in John not just the creator of their favorite comedy, but a wise and entertaining friend who treated their ideas with respect and encouraged their own creative instincts. On this particular autumn morning, John was preparing for what had become a monthly tradition, comedy breakfast at Adelaide Cottage. The informal gatherings had evolved organically, with John sharing stories from his long career while the children regaled him with their latest observations about comedy, their school experiences, and their own creative projects. As his car wound through the familiar route to the cottage, John reflected on how these relationships had changed his perspective on his own legacy. For decades, he had measured his success by professional achievements, critical acclaim, and commercial success. But watching George, Charlotte, and Louis discover joy in his work had reminded him that the true measure of creative achievement was its ability to bring happiness to others. At the cottage, the family was already gathered around the breakfast table when he arrived. The scene had become comfortably familiar, Catherine orchestrating the meal while managing three excited children, William reading snippets from newspapers and commenting on current events, and the children themselves bubbling with stories they were eager to share. "Mr. Cleese," Louis called out as soon as he appeared in the doorway, "we have something amazing to tell you." "And something to show you," Charlotte added mysteriously. "Several somethings," George confirmed with the serious demeanor he adopted when he was particularly excited about something. John settled into what had become his customary chair, accepting the cup of coffee that Catherine offered with practiced efficiency. "I'm all ears," he announced. "What amazing developments have occurred in the past month?" The children exchanged glances, clearly having planned their presentation carefully. "We've been working on something," George began formally. "A project inspired by our conversations with you." "We've written our own comedy episode," Charlotte announced, unable to contain her excitement any longer. "All by ourselves," Louis added proudly. John's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise and delight. "You've written an episode, a complete episode." "Well," George clarified with characteristic precision, "we've written the story and the main scenes. Charlotte did most of the character writing because she's best at understanding how people think." "And George figured out all the funny situations," Charlotte added generously. "He's very good at imagining things going wrong in interesting ways." "What did Louis contribute?" John asked, smiling at the 5-year-old. "I did all the physical comedy ideas," Louis announced, "and I made sure everything was funny enough." William and Catherine watched this exchange with obvious pride and amusement. "They've been working on this for weeks," Catherine explained. "Every evening after dinner, they disappear upstairs to write and plan." "We wanted to surprise you," George said, "and to show you that we really understood what you taught us about making comedy." John was genuinely moved. "This is extraordinary. I'm incredibly honored that you wanted to share this with me. What's your episode about?" The three children launched into an enthusiastic explanation of their creation. The story, they explained, was set in a school where everything that could go wrong with a school play inevitably did go wrong. The headmaster, clearly inspired by Fawlty, kept trying to fix problems and only made them worse. "The main character is Mr. Frantic," Charlotte explained. "He's the headmaster and he wants everything to be perfect for the parents' evening. But every time he tries to fix something, something else breaks," George continued. "Like when he tries to fix the curtain and accidentally pulls down the whole backdrop. And then he gets stuck behind the scenery," Louis added gleefully. As they described their plot, John recognized the influence of Fawlty Towers while also seeing genuine originality and creativity. The children had understood the fundamental principles of situational comedy and applied them to a setting they knew well. "This sounds absolutely brilliant," John said sincerely. "Have you written it all down?" "We have a script," Charlotte announced proudly. "Well, sort of a script. We wrote down all the dialogue and described all the funny things that happen." Would it be possible for me to read it?" The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. All three children began talking at once, excited beyond measure that their comedy hero wanted to see their work. William intervened gently. "Children, let Mr. Cleese finish his coffee, then you can show him your masterpiece." "Actually," John said, "I'd love to see it now if that's all right. I'm far too curious to wait." Charlotte disappeared upstairs and returned with a carefully handwritten notebook. The pages were filled with neat writing interspersed with small drawings that illustrated the physical comedy sequences. John opened the notebook and began to read, his expression growing more impressed with each page. The children had created a complete story with well-developed characters, escalating complications, and genuinely funny situations. More importantly, they had captured the heart of what made situational comedy work. characters with good intentions making increasingly desperate attempts to solve problems they themselves had created. "This is remarkable," he said after finishing the script. "You've created something genuinely original while clearly understanding the principles that make this kind of comedy work." "Do you really think it's good?" George asked anxiously. "I think it's more than good. I think it's the work of three people who have natural instincts for comedy writing." "Could it be made into a real show?" Charlotte wondered. John considered this seriously. "You know, with some development and expansion, this could absolutely be the basis for a children's comedy program. You've identified a perfect setting for this kind of humor, and your characters are well-defined and believable." The possibility hadn't occurred to the children, and they stared at him with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "You mean like on actual television?" Louis asked in amazement. "I mean like on actual television," John confirmed, "though it would require a lot more work and the help of experienced television people." William and Catherine exchanged glances, both clearly surprised by this turn in the conversation. "Mr. Cleese," Catherine said carefully, "are you seriously suggesting that their little project could become something professional?" "I'm suggesting that they've demonstrated real talent and understanding," John replied. "Whether anything comes of it professionally is much less important than the fact that they've discovered they can create something together that brings joy to others." "But could we really make it into a show?" George persisted. John looked around the table at three hopeful faces and two parents who were clearly trying to process this unexpected development. "Here's what I propose," he said thoughtfully. "If you're interested, we could work together to develop your idea further. I could introduce you to some people who make children's television programs. We could see if there's genuine interest in your concept." "Really?" Charlotte breathed. "Really, but," he added seriously, "this would be a learning experience, not a guarantee of anything. The most important outcome would be that you learn about how television programs are actually made." "We'd love that," George exclaimed. "Can we keep writing more episodes?" Louis asked. "Absolutely," John confirmed. "In fact, if we're going to pursue this seriously, you'll need to develop several more episodes to show that the concept can sustain a series." As breakfast continued, the conversation expanded to cover the practical aspects of television production, the collaborative nature of comedy writing, and the importance of perseverance in creative work. "The most important thing," John told them, "is that you continue to enjoy the process. The moment writing comedy becomes a chore rather than a pleasure, you've lost the essence of what makes it worthwhile." "Will you help us with the other episodes?" Charlotte asked. "I would be honored to help," John replied, "though I suspect you three will teach me as much as I teach you." As the morning progressed, John found himself marveling at how his life had been enriched by this unexpected friendship. What had begun with a simple conversation at a royal reception had evolved into something profound and meaningful. These three children had not only rediscovered his love for his own work, but had inspired him to engage with comedy in entirely new ways. "You know," he told William and Catherine as the children excitedly planned their next writing session, "meeting your family has been one of the great gifts of my later years. They've reminded me why I fell in love with comedy in the first place." "The pleasure has been entirely mutual," William replied warmly. "Watching them discover their own creativity through their friendship with you has been extraordinary." As John prepared to leave, promising to return the following week to review their new episodes, he reflected on the unexpected ways that life could surprise you. At 82, he had thought his most meaningful creative collaborations were behind him. Instead, he had found three new partners whose enthusiasm and fresh perspectives were opening up possibilities he had never imagined. The future stretched ahead, filled with the prospect of new episodes, potential television development, and the continuing joy of watching three talented young people discover the magic of creating laughter. It was, John thought as his car pulled away from Adelaide Cottage, exactly the kind of plot twist that Basil Fawlty would never have been able to manage, but that real life sometimes delivered with perfect timing and infinite grace.